At 60 years old, Eliza found herself at a crossroads that many people don't even imagine could exist. A widow for just over 6 months, she didn't know what to do with her house full of silence and memories. But it was there, in that moment of emptiness, that the idea came to her like a spark in the darkness. Why not travel alone? There was nothing holding her back anymore, and she felt that perhaps this was the only way to find herself again. But have you ever stopped to think about what it would be like to start from scratch after a lifetime with someone? What if traveling alone was more than an escape, but an opportunity to completely reinvent yourself? Elisa did exactly that, and it didn't take long for her to realize that her journey would be much deeper than simple trips around the world. She discovered that the real change didn't happen in the places she visited, but within herself. For many people, traveling at 60 seems like a distant dream, a reality limited by age, responsibilities, or fears. But what if true freedom lay in leaving the past behind and seeking something new outside of one's comfort zone? Elisa proved that it is never too late to seek happiness, and more importantly, that loneliness does not have to be a burden, but rather a chance to get to know oneself better and find strengths that one did not even know one had. Elisa knew that her decision would not be easy, but at the same time, she could not let fear dictate her future. For weeks, she found herself in an internal conflict, where part of her wanted to move forward, to see the world, and another still hesitated, fearful of change and loneliness. Traveling alone at 60 years old seemed unlikely, even to her, but something inside her pushed her to make this decision, as if it were a call to reinvent herself. The first trip she took was to Italy. The choice was almost instinctive: Rome, Florence, Venice. Cities that she had always dreamed of visiting, but that were always out of reach, ahead of some future that never arrived. But now at that moment, Eliza had no more time to waste. She signed up for an Italian cooking class, something she had always wanted to do but had never managed to do because of her routine. When she arrived in Rome, the warmth of the Italian sun felt like an unexpected hug. The bustling streets, the colorful markets, and the smell of fresh tomato sauce coming from the trattorias brought a sense of renewal. At first, Elisa felt strange, as if she were out of place. The first few hours in the city were filled with trepidation, as if all the weight of loneliness had returned, reminding her of everything she had lost. But little by little, something happened. She began to realize the beauty of her own company. Without having to worry about anyone else, she could choose her own pace, her own destinations, without rushing. She explored the streets of Rome as if she were rediscovering the world, one step at a time, each corner offering a new surprise. The turning point came one afternoon when Eliza was sitting in a small square, watching the Romans go about their daily routines. She noticed a group of young tourists laughing and chatting animatedly. For a moment, she felt a pang of loneliness, but then she remembered what had brought her there. She didn't need to be part of any group to feel alive. At that moment, an idea took hold of her. Perhaps the true adventure was to surrender to the unknown without expecting anything more than the simple pleasure of living in the moment. In the following days, Elisa allowed herself to live in the flow without rushing, to plan each step. She explored the Colosseum and the Vatican with a more attentive eye, absorbing every bit of history, every detail of the works of art. On every street she walked, Eliza felt a new sense of belonging, as if the world, with its vastness, was there, to be discovered and experienced. The little things, previously insignificant, now became precious moments of a new journey. But the trip was not just about sightseeing or discovering new places. It was about facing loneliness in a different way. Traveling alone, instead of being something to be feared, became a liberation. Elisa began to make friends along the way, something she never imagined possible before. During her cooking class, she met Sophia, a 50-year-old German woman who was also on a journey of self-discovery. They exchanged stories, laughter, and even frustrations, creating a genuine connection in an environment that was completely new to both of them. This encounter made Elisa realize that loneliness didn't have to be permanent. It could be transformed into something that connected her to other people, to other worlds. Elisa went to Florence and then to Venice, always with the feeling of expanding, of renewing herself. In each city, she allowed herself to try something new: a gondola ride, a candlelit dinner in a hidden trattoria, an afternoon exploring museums and churches. She threw herself into the experience with a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. In her youth, traveling had always been a collective experience with her husband, with her children, with friends. Now alone, she discovered that the greatest connection she could have was with herself. Arriving in Venice, Elisa decided, for the first time in her life, to stop worrying about what others thought. She no longer needed approval. In no rush to follow the tourist schedule, she allowed herself to go wherever her feet took her, to the less visited places, the quiet, narrow streets, far from the hustle and bustle of the crowds. She found peace in observing the serenity of the floating city, the empty canals and the ancient stone walls that seemed to tell stories of past lives. The most surprising thing was how much Elisa began to feel genuine pleasure in doing simple things, like walking alone through the squares, having coffee in a bar overlooking the sea, and even in moments of silence when she simply sat and contemplated the horizon. She realized that, although the world was full of people, she was reconnecting with herself in a way she never thought possible. The trip that began as an escape from the pain of loss turned into an experience of healing and rebirth. Elisa was no longer running away from anything. She was heading towards a new life, a life full of possibilities. She finally felt that she could be who she wanted to be without the pressure of meeting anyone's expectations. Her journey was just beginning, and the world, with all its surprises, seemed to offer her a chance to rewrite her story. Elisa continued her travel journey with a new outlook, more free, more connected to herself and the world around her. She began to realize that, even in such diverse destinations, the most valuable moments were not in the tourist attractions, but in the small, everyday experiences that people often overlook in search of the next big thing. The simple act of talking to a local, understanding the history of a small cafe, or even getting lost in the streets of an unfamiliar city became what moved her the most. In Barcelona, she had an unexpected encounter that would change the way she saw life. Elisa was in an old bookstore in the Gothic Quarter, immersed in books that reflected her passion for art and history, when an exotic-looking woman approached her. She spoke Spanish with an accent that Elisa took a while to identify, but which, over time, revealed itself to be a mix of several languages that life had imposed on her. Her name was Maria, a woman in her late 70s who had also traveled the world and who, by coincidence, was in the city to visit her daughter who lived there. They talked about books, about the art of traveling, and during the conversation, Elisa discovered that Maria had lost her husband years before and had decided, after that, that life should not stop. Maria's story was inspiring. She not only traveled alone but also took risks in new experiences, making friends with people from different parts of the world and, most importantly, allowing herself to learn something new every day. Maria shared with Elisa the secret of her freedom. I discovered that life is not about what you lose, but about what you allow yourself to gain each day. These words stayed with Elisa for a long time. She understood that it was not necessary to live trapped in the past, in suffering, in pain. She could, at any moment, decide to be happy, to find new forms of joy and discovery. The connection with Maria was just one of the many experiences that Elisa would have while traveling. She began to realize that, as vast and unpredictable as the world was, there was something familiar in each culture she visited, something that connected all people in a profound way. This sense of belonging, a feeling that everyone shared a common human essence, became one of the greatest lessons of her journey. In Lisbon, for example, Elisa found a group of artists who met every afternoon to paint on the banks of the Tagus River. She was invited to join, and, although she had no artistic skills, she accepted the invitation. There. She discovered that art did not have to be a search for perfection, but a way to express herself and often to simply let herself be carried away by the emotion of the moment. During one of these encounters, she painted a canvas that represented the sea. Although it was simple, the painting reflected her new perspective on life. Fluid, without fixed forms, always in motion, these unexpected encounters became the fuel for a new way of seeing life. Elisa began to understand that wasted time, unmade choices, and missed opportunities did not define her worth. What mattered was the now, and now she was making the most of every second. At 60 years old, she felt more alive than ever. With each new destination, each new person, each new experience, Elisa discovered that life was in fact a field of infinite possibilities. Her journey took her to Greece, a country she had always dreamed of visiting. As she walked through the ancient ruins of Athens, Elisa felt a deep connection with history, with the people who had lived there and who had somehow shaped who she was today. She sat atop the Acropolis, looking down at the city below, and realized how she was finally at peace with her own story. She was no longer the woman who had lost her husband, the woman scarred by grief, but someone who had reinvented herself and was ready to live for herself. On this trip, Elisa also realized that she no longer needed to worry about what others thought of her. She had her own priorities now, her own desires, and that didn't mean being selfish, but rather being true to herself. Throughout her journey, she began to break free from the standard society imposed on women her age. She didn't need to be a model grandmother or live up to the expectations of a peaceful retirement without any major adventures. She was finally on her own journey, searching for a purpose that was hers without compromise. At her last stop, in a small village on the coast of Portugal, Elisa found a haven of peace. There, she could spend the day reading under the shade of a tree or simply watching the waves crash on the beach. Time seemed to slow down, and she realized that it was indeed possible to live fully, even with the challenges of age. She had learned to savor each moment, and the beauty of life was not in the great achievements, but in the small joys of everyday life. Elisa returned home after months of traveling. She was no longer the same. What had once seemed like a woman lost in her pain was now a woman full of stories, experiences, and learning. She had finally discovered what it means to live in the present, what it means to give yourself permission to be happy at any moment in life. And so, upon returning, Elisa knew that her life would never be the same again. What she discovered on her travels was not a secret about the world, but about herself. She finally allowed herself to be who she had always wanted to be. And most importantly, she discovered that, no matter how old you are, there is always time to start over. Elisa returned to her home in São Paulo with her mind full of vivid images of the cities she had visited and the lessons she had learned. But when she got home, what she found was not an immediate relief. The house, with its old furniture and photos of moments that no longer existed, seemed like a mirror of who she had been and not of the woman she had become. Even though she had lived a transformative experience, the void that longing had left was still there, waiting for her attention. Loneliness, which had previously seemed like a constant enemy, was now an opportunity for a new beginning. She knew she did not want to go back to the way she was before. Traveling for months had given her a new perspective, and she was determined to use that experience to move forward. She no longer wanted to define herself by what she had lost, but by what she had learned about herself during her journey. There was a strength within Eliza now, something that made her believe that it was possible to start over at any time. But the path would not be simple. What Eliza did not expect, and could not have foreseen, was the resistance she felt from her own family. Her children, friends, and even those closest to her reacted to her new vision of life with a certain discomfort. Her children, for example, did not understand why she wanted to continue with so many trips, with so many discoveries, when, in their eyes, she should be retiring and enjoying a quieter life. For them, Elisa's life had a format that no longer fit with what she was seeking. They saw her as a woman who had to conform to a certain standard of comfortable old age, who had already fulfilled her purpose. This pressure, unexpected and frustrating, caused Eliza to have a new wave of doubts. How could she maintain the freedom she had gained without hurting the people she loved? How could she continue to follow her own path without appearing selfish, without causing discomfort? She, who now understood that happiness is not based on meeting other people's expectations, suddenly found herself in the middle of an internal conflict. And this challenge was not about traveling alone, but about how to balance her newfound freedom with family ties. It was on a rainy morning that Eliza, already a little tired of this internal tension, decided to do something she had never imagined. She sat down to write a letter to her children. She knew that the conversation she needed to have with them could not be just verbal, but something that came from the heart and that would be understood without pressure or judgment. The letter was long, and Elisa put into it all her vulnerability, all her feelings about the trip, about what she had learned, and above all, about who she was becoming. She explained that the process of self-discovery never stops, and that, for her, this meant exploring the world, challenging herself, and, above all, reconnecting with life after so many years dedicated to others. The hardest part was her initial response. Her children, as much as they understood the pain she had gone through, still had difficulty seeing their mother as someone outside of the role of mother or the role of grandmother. They had an image of Eliza as a woman with a settled life without much to look for outside her comfort zone. But Eliza, now stronger and more determined, did not let herself be shaken. It was no longer about what others expected of her. It was about what she herself knew she needed to do to be happy. This phase of adaptation, where she tried to balance her independent life with her family's expectations, was difficult but also necessary. Elisa understood that she could not please everyone, but that, by taking care of herself, she was offering her family a truer, more authentic version of who she was. Over the months, the dialogue with her children became deeper. They began to notice, little by little, that their mother was different, that she had returned more full of life and with a sparkle in her eyes that she had not had before. They saw the woman she had become, strong, courageous, capable of being whoever she wanted to be, regardless of her age. And over time, this new Eliza was accepted, understood, and even admired. Meanwhile, she continued to travel, but in a different way. Travel was no longer an escape, but a conscious choice to live each moment intensely. Elisa signed up for a series of art and philosophy workshops so that she could, beyond just traveling, continue to delve deeper into her own interests. She began to write about her experiences, her travels, and the discoveries she made about herself. The words began to flow, and soon she had the idea of writing a book, not only about her travels, but about how traveling the world made her travel within, into her own soul. Her book became a reflection not only of the freedom she had achieved, but also of the difficulties she faced in finding this space for herself. She spoke of new beginnings, of losses, and above all, of how life is never lost as long as there is room for growth and discovery. Elisa was no longer alone on her journey. She had created a new network of friends, people who, like her, had gone through transformative experiences and who now shared their own stories. These encounters became a fundamental part of her journey, people who inspired Elisa to continue searching, to continue reinventing herself. The world seemed more within her reach than ever before. Elisa now understood that the process of healing is never-ending. Life is a constant evolution, no matter how old you are or how much time has passed. She was willing to move forward, unafraid, to face the unknown, always in search of new lessons, new horizons, and above all, new ways to be happy. Over the months, Elisa became an example to many around her, a woman who, at 60 years old, had allowed herself to reinvent her life in a way that many had never imagined possible. Looking back, she saw herself no longer as the widow who had lost her husband, but as the woman who, even after the pain, chose to live again. It was not just about traveling the world, but about traveling within herself, understanding what it truly meant to be alive. The book she wrote about her journey became an unexpected success, not only because of the exotic adventures she narrated, but because of the universal lessons of resilience and self-discovery that people were able to experience as their own. Elisa spoke about how the pain of loss, loneliness, and even fear of the future could be faced with courage and action. She said that instead of waiting for life to go back to the way it was, she had decided to transform her reality. And in doing so, she inspired many other people to question their own limitations and allow themselves to step out of their comfort zone, no matter their age. With each conference she gave, with each lecture she gave, Elisa received letters and messages from women, men, young and old, all seeking a fuller, truer, more authentic life. Many were grateful for the words she shared. Others were inspired by her courage to make the changes they had been putting off for years. She had unknowingly become a kind of guide, someone who showed that even after so much loss and uncertainty, life could still be full of possibilities. On one of her most recent trips, Elisa had the opportunity to return to Italy to that same cooking class where it all began. Now, she was no longer the hesitant tourist, but a woman who had already lived so many stories, who understood the true meaning of the word travel. Sitting in the same square where, months before, she had felt lonely and insecure, Elisa looked around and smiled. She knew she had found something more valuable than any tourist destination or memory. She had found herself. That afternoon, she met up with Sofia, the German woman she had met in Rome, and together they strolled through the streets of Florence, reminiscing about their first impressions of the city and the conversations they had shared. Sofia, now 55, had also changed. After reading Elisa's book, she decided to take a more independent path, traveling alone through Europe and finding a new purpose for her life. Elisa and Sofia embraced, and it was as if all the distances and years that had passed melted away in that moment. They had found themselves again, not just on the streets of Florence, but on the journey of self-discovery that continued to shape them. At the end of the year, Elisa launched a series of workshops on reinvention and self-discovery after 60. She believed that the key to a meaningful life was not in following a script or waiting for ideal conditions, but in taking control of your own story. She shared her own experiences, her fears, her failures and achievements, with the goal of helping others understand that starting over can happen at any stage of life, and that the past does not define who we are, but rather what we choose to do with what we have now. In one of Elisa's last talks, a man in the audience raised his hand and asked, "Have you ever been afraid to move forward, to start from scratch again after everything you've been through?" Elisa looked at him with a serene smile and replied, "Fear never goes away, but courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward, even with it. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the same place with the same fears and waiting for a change that would never come. So I did the only thing I could do. I gave myself a chance. And in doing so, I found what really matters. The room was silent for a moment, and then, as if a wave of understanding passed through everyone, people began to applaud. Elisa knew that her words had touched the hearts of many. She also knew that although her journey had been unique, the lessons she had learned were universal. Anyone, at any point in their life, could choose to follow a new path, seek something different, and live more authentically. She did not return home feeling like she had completed her mission. Elisa knew that, like life, the journey of self-discovery never ends. She would continue to travel, write, teach, and most importantly, reinvent herself because she knew that by doing so, she was living the life she had always wanted. And as she looked to the future, Elisa finally understood that the true journey is not about the destinations visited, but about what we learn along the way. She discovered that when we give ourselves the chance to truly know ourselves, we are able to create a life that is ours, without limitations, without regrets, and with the knowledge that, no matter how old we are, there is always time to start over. If you also believe that it's never too late to start over and find new opportunities, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow our next stories. Let's go together on this journey of self-discovery and transformation. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any news. Until next time.